Hi, this is Dan Walsh from Red Hat Dan on Tech. The last couple of weeks, we've been talking about AI, and that's going to continue today. I want to introduce my coworker, Cedric Clyburn, who is a developer advocate on AI. And more importantly, he's the person that's been helping me put this whole thing together over the last couple of months as we're getting this out, because we all know old farts like me can't do this newfangled YouTube stuff. So Cedric takes care of all that background, but really we have a big overlap here. So today we're going to be talking about InstructLab. As I mentioned a few weeks ago, one of the strategies of Red Hat AI is to help developers get into AI and how they could use AI to, allow their applications to get into AI. But soon after you get an applications running AI, you realize that sort of the public models, the general models, don't have your private data in them. And so Red Hat, along with IBM, has been announced back at Red Hat Summit that we have this new project called InstructLab. And really, InstructLab is all about allowing you to add sort of private data or internal data to your company to be able to share it. And I'll let Cedric take her from there. Cedric, tell us all about InstructLab.
Woohoo! So thanks, Dan, first and foremost. It's fun being behind the scenes of the show and helping you produce this. You came to me at Summit and we were like, let's get this thing rolling. And since then, we're almost at 10 episodes and hopefully many more. I think you did a great introduction of why this is so important, because models right now have just been trained with all the publicly accessible data that's out there on the internet. And how do we start kind of taking value from AI in the form of our personal data or our business data so that we can see real results that are tailored to what we're actually doing? So let me go ahead and share my slides. I'll kind of talk about the project real quick and we'll see some demos, and it's going to be a fun time. I'm over here at the InstructLab.ai website, and this is kind of where you can learn more about the paper that this project was based on. And it's a really cool read to kind of learn about what's been going on with the project. And so the project includes a couple of different things, but mainly this is kind of taking the same idea that open source is done for software development and putting this for model development. So the open source community is able to contribute new skills, knowledge, ideas, and this really democratizes the building and the development of AI models so that everyone has a seat at the table. And I think that's important when we start using AI, because it's going to affect everyone in every type of different domain. And so there's a triage process where pull requests can come into the GitHub organization and project. Those can be accepted, and then that model is continuously built and updated and shared with the community on Hugging Face. I'll just talk about how it works real quick. Essentially, what you should know about models, and this is pretty important, is that they store probabilities, right? They're non-deterministic. They're essentially, a next word generator at their simplest form. But the thing is, we can teach them intuition, and that's what's really important, because we can have them behave in certain different ways, be adapted to models' language or language of a certain domain, an industry. And if we contribute that in the form of these question and answer pairs, which is what would a good question be and what would a good response be, then we can generate a lot of synthetic data that can influence a model's behavior and do something called parameter efficient fine-tuning. So integrating that back into the base model, but freezing, as you see here, some of the main weights of the model so that not everything is changed, but we're able to influence a model to think in a certain way and to help us in different domains with our public or private data. So I think that's
so is this a tool for data scientists? Do I have to be a data scientist to be able to do this?
So that's what's so great about it is it's not. And essentially the way that we think about like directory structures and folders on our main computer is the same way that we organize this data. And historically, data scientists had to do a lot of labeling, they had to do data cleansing. And now in this kind of taxonomy format is what it's called, we can just assign it in a folder as YAML. And YAML is essentially plain text. It's easier, in my opinion, than JSON, so that even if I'm not a developer, not a data scientist, maybe I'm an expert in law or in agriculture, I can create this file. There's also UI coming out for InstructLab. So I think it's very accessible. So I want to show you a quick demo here of InstructLab. Essentially, the InstructLab project is a few different components. So you've got a CLI here that I can use on my Mac, my Windows, Linux machine. Taxonomy, that folder directory for organizing the data in simple YAML files is here as well. And then the community, so you can get involved, join the Slack, etc. So that's all here in this github.com/InstructLab organization. And you can see some of the cool people on the team here. The community is amazing. But what I want to show you essentially is just a quick example of some of the limitations of large language models. So Dan, I'm sure you heard about the Euro 2024 football championship a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I follow it very closely.
I'm sure you're a big fan. You need Boston in there. One of the limitations that you probably experienced is that when you ask a model a specific question about whatever my topic or domain is, or about any type of specific info, you're probably going to get an answer that one might be wrong, or two, the model might know or might not know, but still give you a confident answer, no matter if it knows or not. And so there's a big issue here with these models that want to give you an answer, but they don't always have the information and knowledge in their training to be able to do so. And so this is a big issue, right? Because we want our models and our AI-enabled applications to be serving the correct information in a specific use case. And these models are very generalistic. So what the InstructLab project does through the CLI that you can use on your machine, and then there's a whole productized version where it's, with much better compute, A100 GPUs, stuff that I can't afford. But essentially, it's a pretty easy pip install to get it working on my machine. So for example, if I'm on my M1 Mac, I just set up a virtual environment. I hop in there and I do a pip install InstructLab. So I can set up a project with iLab init in order to do some of the training, generate some extra data on top of what I provide to the model, and then infuse that back into the model with this parameter efficient fine tuning. And I'll go ahead and do that here. So I'll hop out and I'll CD into, I think I did there you go, folder for you, Dan demo. And there's not much in here. So I'm going to go ahead and start out this project with an iLab init. And so this is going to go ahead and clone this taxonomy folder for me so that I can provide it some data. And that's going to be super helpful to give me a starting place, as I'm not a data scientist at all, in order to start giving my model a little bit of information and be able to build much more data from that to influence the model's direction. So now we've got this config.yaml, which is kind of our way to define some of the stuff in the project. So the base model that we're using, the amount of instructions that we want to generate by default, the area where our data is going to be. And then when we actually serve our model, well, we want it to be on localhost port 8000, et cetera here, so we can find that. But with the model already downloaded, you'll have to do that as well. iLab works by having a teacher model. And so the models are going to help you to create extra and additional training data on top of what I already have.
I don't want to have to create 100 items in so.
Right. This by hand would take a lot of work. And historically, right, fine tuning has been a tough process because of how much data you need to have to influence a LLM in a certain way. And so I have an example here of this taxonomy folder that I've already cloned. And here it is. So we can see that we've got a couple different folders of skills and knowledge that we want to teach a model. For example, every type of topic and subject, as I said before, we're teaching a model intuition, how to behave and how to produce results in a certain environment. And that's really helpful for our organization and enterprise use cases. Now, this is an example of an insurance organization. We have these question and answer pairs. So we have just knowledge about what's the rental car policy. And all of this is labeled in an open source fashion in a repository. so that we can point to these initial question and answer pairs, but also some extra ones here, extra information in Markdown that the model is essentially going to be able to use through the synthetic data generation process of creating a lot more information. And we'll see that in action here if we have a second. So it's all pointing to commits. It's all in these.
So I could add
files.
knowledge to the model just, through using a Markdown file, or, of course I could convert PDFs to Markdown. I think there's a lot of tools on the internet to do that. So it's simple as adding a Markdown file and then adding a bunch of questions and answers to help the AI sort of understand what you're after or what you're going for in this model, when you're training it.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's going to be a UI on top of InstructLab. So even if you don't have a text editor that you want to use on your local machine, you can essentially just give those question and answers to the UI, and that'll pass it into a YAML file. And we can actually also attribute this. So make sure that our sources are valid and that we have permission to use this information. And I think that's really important, is having that level of transparency and trust with the models that we're using, because we know what they were trained on. I think that's a really cool aspect of this project.
Right. Obviously, if bad actors, we don't want bad actors being able to contribute bad data to AI models. And
exactly. And that's part of the triage process, at least for the community version. And if you're using this in a business sense, that as well. And I'll kind of skip through some of the different steps, because there's a whole series of being able to see if the training data is valid. So I'll go ahead and show you a model that I've trained in this repository. So here, when I do ls, we have that same config. We have a directory for models, but we also have generated data that I can show you real quick. So go over to generated. We see that once we've done the synthetic data generation process, we have data that we've created from these question and answer pairs, that some is saved, some is kept, and some is discarded here. And that's a good way to differentiate between good data and bad data, right? Not all data is created equal. And once we have that, we do an iLab model train, bake that into the weights of the original model. And then, as a lot of developers are using that quantized, compressed version of models in GGUF format, we can convert it into that. So we could use it in Podman AI Lab, or we could upload those weights or that model to Hugging Face, and other developers could use that model based on this training data that I've infused and put into the model, and also have a way to contribute that information upstream, so that we have a way to keep and collect that information as well. So, combining open source methods into model development and having an accessible way for not only data scientists, but developers and regular folk to be able to contribute to these models is the goal of the project.
Okay, so let's go back to you were showing me the World Cup, the Euro Cup or the World Cup standings. How do I, give me an example of how you would improve the return from the model?
So for the Euro, that's a pretty basic example of giving the knowledge, the knowledge to the model about, say, sports, right? So this is just a brief one about, hey, what is the Euro? Who won the Euro? How many times did they win it? And that's all publicly accessible on my personal GitHub. But that's just a fun example. If we have just a few more seconds, I want to show you this in action in a kind of business use case. I'm going to go ahead and serve my model. So InstructLab can do model training, but it can also do model serving. So we're going to point to the trained model directory and point to a quantized version of that model that we've trained with InstructLab. I can chat with it here, but I've got a Quarkus app running at the same time with LangChain. So it's going to allow us to make calls to our model. And this kind of is a great way to understand what's going on in the background for an AI-enabled application. So essentially, we're listening for a model on port 8000 that InstructLab is serving on, but we could use Ollama or ChatGPT or another model essentially to connect to our application. and we have a WebSocket to make calls and be able to talk to this model. So it's hosted on port 5000. I'll go over there right now so we can check this little application out. And it allows us to see different claims for this fake organization. And this is a big use case for insurance as a specific industry, because we can summarize, say, an email or different information so that an employee at my company could be able to easily digest this and be able to ask specific questions about these different claims. So let's say, was anyone injured? Right. I can ask these questions in plain text and be able to get a response back about the specific information that we're talking about. And we'll see this in the logs here that we're providing a prompt to this model. So, hey, you're a helpful assistant. And hey, here's all the information about the claim. And this is what's known as prompt engineering, just a very simple way to work with these models. But this only gets you so far, right? You need the model to understand the specific domain it's in, be able to be familiar with the terminology and lingo and different use cases that happen. And so RAG can provide a way to reference, specific up-to-date information, but fine-tuning is a way to really be able to adapt it for the data and the information that's going to see in this enterprise use case.
Really, this ends up being a far more powerful version of RAG. And for those that don't know, RAG is basically allowing you to take a model and give it some additional data and then query the model on the data. So the usual example I like for RAG would be I give it a 1,000-page book and I want to ask questions on the book, and without having to actually read the book. So anyways, but with InstructLab, I can actually make it far better at doing even RAG type models.
Right, because you're not adding the information on top of the model, you're baking it into the model itself. And that's really powerful. Essentially, we taught a model in these Q&A files what a flux capacitor is, which doesn't exist, but we added it to the training data and we gave it a cost of, I think, $10 million. And so if I ask a question about this claim here for Marty McFly, it looks like he might have damaged his flux capacitor in the photo we have from the claim. Hopefully, fingers crossed, is a replacement flux capacitor. We'll see that based on the training data that we provided in these Q&A files and in Markdown, we can specify domain-specific ideas and knowledge. So the flux capacitor is $10 million. That doesn't exist, but we were able to give the information and knowledge to this model so that it can make better responses based on this use case. So that's kind of everything I wanted to show with InstructLab. It's a really cool project.
So InstructLab has really two different ways of interacting. One is you can add your private data, and obviously you want to keep that private to your internal company. But someone like me who's I have domain knowledge. Obviously, I know a lot about SELinux. So theoretically, I could go to InstructLab and ask a whole bunch of questions and answers about SELinux and actually donate that to the upstream community to improve Marlo's knowledge of SELinux, right? As an example. So one of the goals of the InstructLab upstream is to, in my opinion, is to become like a Wikipedia of knowledge, and so people that want to add public knowledge can just go to the website and actually upload their own files to it and basically add the knowledge, and there'll be curators on it to make sure that the knowledge again is not evil or wrong and things like that. But this is cool, very interesting. So I too can become a data scientist without having to go to school to do it, in my opinion, right? Can I change my resume?
Yeah, senior prompt engineer. I think that's a great title for you.
That's great. I hope everybody goes out and tries InstructLab, and we'll talk to you later.